What's up, y'all? How y'all doing? Is meat really that bad? I just woke up, and so I figured, and present. I figure, yeah, that some stimulation to get us, started, through the day. What? To get us started for the day. Yeah. So education is key. Learn something. Shut up.
Food is arguably the best thing
God.
about being alive.
What the
No
fuck?
other bodily pleasure is enjoyed multiple times every day and never gets old.
Bro, honestly, food
It's
is
an
a
expression
drug.
of culture, our parents'
I
love,
ain't even gonna
and a
hold ya.
means of celebration or
That
comfort.
shit is a drug.
That's why it hits a special nerve when we're told we should change what and how we eat to fight rapid climate change. One of the most delicious
I'm not
foods,
doing that.
meat, gets the worst press.
I'm
It
not
doesn't
doing
help
that.
that the topic is really hard to properly research yourself and that debates get emotional quickly. But clearly, science can give us an answer. The reality is, well, it's complicated. Let's take a look at 3 climate arguments against meat that are used a lot and see what happens.
Yo, they got their whole intro and shit. Oh my god. It reminds me of like
1. Does our diet really
the
play that
Discovery
bigger
Channel or
role
some
in
shit like
climate
that.
change? Feeding billions of people is impossible without causing emissions. Even if someday we have zero-carbon tractors, refrigerators and cookers running on renewable energy, and electric trucks to move our food, there are still unavoidable emissions. Rice emits methane. We cut down forests to make room for pastures and crops. And we emit nitrous oxide when we use fertilizers and manure. Worldwide food production is responsible for about 26% of all human-made greenhouse gas emissions, which is
Wow.
unfortunate since food is not optional.
Right.
While 26% doesn't sound that bad, it means that even if we extinguished all other sources of emissions today, the emissions from food alone would still use up our entire carbon budget by 2100. So no matter how we twist and turn it, food is a
Wow.
real driver of climate
That's actually
change.
insane.
Still, emissions from different food items vary a lot. How do things look when we compare their footprints separately?
So that's what's crazy
Food's
then,
climate
because
impact.
we're not gonna stop. We're not gonna go back to like the caveman type. We're just people. We're not doing that as a society. We're not gonna do that. You would think like when push comes to shove, like it's like, yo, we really finna die. Like we need to just, bro, go kill the fucking squirrel outside. We're not, motherfuckers are not gonna do that. So like, death is near. The Earth's been around for a cool minute, but the end is near. I mean, 25. I might still be alive. Oh shit, I might still be alive. Nah, so we for sure gonna be dead when all this shit goes down. But still, it's crazy to think. Change the
An
camera
analysis
angle a
that
little
looks
bit.
at all the emissions of a product throughout its existence, from production to transportation, packaging, use, and waste management. In the most detailed meta-analysis of life cycle assessments to date, beef emissions stand out at the top. On average, a kilogram of beef emits 71 kilograms of CO2 equivalents. Lamb is also high at 40 kilograms. Pork emits 12, and poultry 10 kilograms. At the bottom, we have lots of plant-based foods.
Tofu.
Potatoes, for example, emit around 150 times less than beef. The most important aspect of food
Oh,
isn't
fuck with
weight,
tofu.
though, it's nutrient density. A kilogram of beef would keep you alive much longer than a kilogram of potatoes. So how does the ranking change if we compare emissions per calorie or protein? Not much. Animal protein is still the most costly for the environment, and beef and lamb are also outliers in emissions per calorie. But is this fair? After all, not all beef is the same. There are all sorts of ways to rear cattle, from pure grass-fed to factory farming. The worst beef comes in at 105 kilograms of emissions per 100 grams of protein, the best at only 9, a tenfold difference. In contrast, most other foods, especially plant-based, have a much narrower spectrum. Still, the best beef is worse than the worst plant. Okay, but this
Right.
seems promising. Can we buy the right beef and lower our emissions? Maybe by buying locally produced beef to minimize our footprint? 2. Does buying local food actually matter? Let's stick with beef
I've never
since
thought about all
it's such
this.
an outlier. By buying locally, you are trying to avoid emissions from transportation and packaging. But it turns out these
Okay.
only account for 0.5 to 2% of beef's total emissions. Actually, transport and packaging combined are only about 11% of all food emissions. Nearly all food transport emissions are produced over the last few miles, the regional travel on the road supplying the markets and shops in your area. International food transport happens mostly on freight ships, which are insanely efficient.
What the hell?
For
Some
example,
shit in my eye.
shipping 1 kilogram of avocados from South America to Europe generates about 0.3 kilograms of CO2 equivalents in transport emissions and around 2.5 kilograms overall, while 1 kilogram of beef from your local butcher will come in at 18 kilograms in CO2 equivalents at least.
What?
So even when shipped great distances, emissions from almost all plant-based foods cause lower emissions than locally produced animal products.
How, Sway?
Okay, so if transport doesn't play a big role, what causes the vast amounts of emissions from beef then? By far the largest share of beef emissions consists of methane released directly by the animals. While CO2 hangs around for centuries, methane only stays in the atmosphere for decades. But in these short periods, it is very powerful. All in all, methane has already caused 23 to 40% of human-made warming so far. There's
Yo, what?
controversy about how bad this is exactly, and we don't want to dive in too deep here, but the way things stand, any kinds of extra emissions are not great. Still, all cows burp and fart to similar degrees. What explains the spectrum of beef emissions? There are a couple of things. It makes a difference if the beef comes from a dairy herd or one dedicated
Yo.
to beef production.
What?
44% of the world's beef comes from dairy cows, sharing its footprint with dairy products. Dairy cows tend to get higher quality feed, which makes them grow faster and emit less methane. Geography
okay.
also plays a role because it determines which farming methods are possible. The worst factor by far is the destruction of forests for farmland. Not only does this release the CO2 that was bound in the flora, it sets free carbon that was stored in the soil and destroys its ability to store it in the future. This aspect accounts for much of the range of emissions in beef. The worst emitters are farms burning down rainforest for farmland, especially in Brazil. There is a sinister truth hidden here.
What's it called? I'm pretty sure, like, in the last year, California, they've lost, like, how much land, I don't know the number, right? But, like, it's like, what, twice the size of, like, I think it was like Tennessee or some shit. I know he was talking about Brazil, but I just thought I'd share that knowledge. But I don't even remember the fact correctly, so this was pointless. I don't know. It's only been 6 minutes. What the
The
fuck?
more animals suffer, the better they are in terms
I felt like
of
I'm in
climate
class
change
for like
because
30
they are
minutes.
way more efficient.
What the hell?
They use less land and their food is brought right to them, and so they grow faster and don't expend energy on things like walking. Cattle in a factory
fuck is
farm
the
that
what?
never get to roam pastures can sometimes be less destructive for the climate than cattle grazing peacefully on a formerly
Does
lush
walking
piece
hurt
of
the environment?
rainforest.
Gotta be bet, no way.
But isn't it a bit out of touch with reality to demonize
Oh.
cows so much? Some of the land these animals are grazing on isn't suitable for crops anyway. By grazing on pastures, they can turn things we can't digest into food. Isn't farming animals just a smart way to make the best use of unused resources? 3. Don't cows mainly use land that we can't use for agriculture or other things?
'Cause that's how to be
About
any
half
longer.
of the world's
Go ahead.
ice and desert-free land is used for agriculture, an area the size of the entire Americas plus China. Half of all agriculturally used land is dedicated to animals. Most of it is grassland, 65% of which cannot be converted to cropland. So pasturing animals is actually a very efficient way to use those areas since we
Right.
can't grow human food there anyway.
Oh god.
There are a couple of catches here though.
What?
While the idea of cows turning useless grass into steak is nice, it is part of a marketing lie. Even though it is so massive, pastureland alone can't support the ruminants living on it. Globally, grazing systems sustain only 13% of beef production. So if we were to switch to 100% grass-fed, we'd simply have to eat much less beef.
Right.
In the US,
Makes sense,
beef
makes sense.
production would crash by some 70% if it were to exclusively rely on grass.
Right.
The only way to sustain our high demand for meat is by growing crops and feeding them to our cattle. And we haven't even talked about chicken and pigs, which exclusively eat feed crops. Because of this feed demand, less than half of the world's cereals are used directly as human food. 41%
Wow.
is fed to animals. The same is true for soy. There's a lot of talk about Amazon deforestation for soy production, which makes us think of soy milk and tofu. But only 19% of global soy production goes towards products for humans. About 77% is used to feed animals. Besides, land without food crops isn't automatically ecologically useless. A beef-free diet would free up around 2 billion hectares, a vegan diet would free up around 3 billion hectares of land. We could use this land to grow forests or restore wild grasslands, basically anything that could suck carbon out of the atmosphere. If we spared 3 billion hectares of
so
land,
much information.
it could remove
Holy
about
shit.
800 billion tons of CO2 from the air over 100 years. By comparison, we emit about 50 billion tons of CO2 equivalents per year at the moment. Okay, to summarize, food is a huge driver of emissions. Meat,
I got
especially
class in a
beef,
bit too.
is
What
the
the
worst
fuck?
food in terms of emissions.
My head
Buying
hurt.
locally does not have a big impact on food emissions compared to the type of food you're consuming. When it comes to beef, cattle that are grass-fed can sometimes even be counterproductive because they just need much more land. Even if you find the most environmentally friendly beef in the world, your burger still comes with a significantly higher carbon footprint than a veggie patty. You can decide for yourself what you want to do with this information.
I'm not eating a veggie patty.
Make it a little easier. We are big fans of
This is an ad. Hey, salute. But I ain't getting paid, so we're going here. Actually, no, let's do like a...
scrams.
No, stop.
stick-
What the fuck? So yeah, that was the video. Appreciate y'all watching. I learned a lot, but I don't know, my head just fucking hurt.